So, Trev, let's talk about the Notre Dame offense because this is the side of the ball that I'm probably most concerned about, if I'm being honest, because it's the side of the ball where you haven't. I mean, look, you never know when I've said that there's going to be a game between now and whenever their season ends where the Notre Dame defense is just not their typical, normal, brilliant selves. And that happens to everybody. I mean, every team goes through that at some point in time. You know what I mean? And, you know, I think of that Alabama, that 2012 Alabama football team, you know what I mean? And just how brilliant they were that year and how dominant they were that year and just how they just, blew out Michigan to start the season and blew out Tennessee, blew out a really good Mississippi State team, beat LSU on the road. I mean, they were just a great team. And then they lost at home to Texas A&M in a game where they just could not stop Johnny Manziel. And it was just one of those things where up until that point in time, they had not allowed a single opponent to score more than 17 points, Trev. I mean, and that was against number 5 LSU on the road. It was the most points you'd given up all year. I mean, you held Mississippi State, I believe, that might have been before him, but I believe that was no, actually, I don't think it was a Dak Prescott team. But, I know it was a Dan Mullen team. But I'm actually going to check real quick to see if it was. It was Tyler Russell was the quarterback then, who was a good football player who was there before. Dak was their backup on that team. But that was a good football team, and that was a number 11 team in the country. That team was that year, and they beat them 38-7. And then they just kind of had that 1 week against Johnny Manziel, and just couldn't stop them. Everybody has it. I think of the Clemson defense in 2016, as good as it was. It just couldn't stop Pitt. For whatever reason, just couldn't stop Pitt. And those things happen. So that's going to happen. But you can't. There's a level of, I expect the defense to kind of play a certain way. The offense is the one that you just don't quite know what you're going to get from week to week. I do believe we have a greater sense of, we know what we're going to get from an effort standpoint. There's been a much more consistent level of effort from the offense really in the last 5-6 games, but the execution, the focus has still wavered quite a lot up and down. And we've seen some really good things from this offense. Obviously against Navy, they were clicking. Florida State, and then Virginia, they were clicking a lot of ways, but then it was just like Florida State was just not focused, not locked in. They knew the team sucked. With Virginia, I thought it was more of, they were actually kind of locked in and executing well in regards to completions and runs and things like that. But then they would just get behind the sticks because of this dumb penalty and that dumb penalty and things like that. So there was a lack of focus in that regard that hurt them. You can't afford to have the kind of slow start that they've had in recent games, which leads us right into why key number 1 is, it's as important in this game as it has. It's more important in this game. It's always important. It's always key number 1. But it's more important in this game than it has been all season, because of the fact that you are playing a team that is going to limit your possessions. And you're talking about, you may only get 5-6 possessions in a game against this team. You have to get points early and often to win this game to win this game, period. And then, of course, to win it the way you need to be putting 6 on the board every time your offense is going down there before you bring your special teams on and get that number 7, right? I mean, that you have to maximize. This has to be the most efficient scoring game that Notre Dame has had all season, in my opinion. And the closest we've seen to it's Navy. But even then, it was like, they got a few. They started that first drive, but then they had first 2 drives they scored, and then the third one they missed a field goal, and then you kind of let Navy back in, but you did get points in your first couple. You need to do something like that again in this game, because you can't assume that they're going to put the ball on the ground as much as Navy did in that game. So it's so incredibly important in this game to start fast, Trev.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's also going to put the defense in a clear mindset too, because they know who they're going up against. They know they're going up against a quarterback that has 21 rushing touchdowns through 8 games. They know the kind of pressure that's on them to perform week in and week out. But to your point, it's impossible to ask that of one side of the football for 16 games, right? If Notre Dame makes it all the way. They're due. I don't want to be negative Nancy, but Notre Dame's defense has been amazing this year. And when I mean they're due for a bad game, I don't think Army's going to go and put up 35 points. That's not what I mean. It's just there's a chance that you might not see the typical dominant, like teams are celebrating when they get past the 50-yard line on Notre Dame's defense, right? Like it's just all of that encompassing is why a fast start is necessary for Notre Dame's offense, because what I said earlier, I wholeheartedly believe Army is not a team like stylistically that can play from behind. So if they're looking down the barrel at a 7-0 start with, 11 minutes left in the first quarter, I mean, that's, you know what I mean? That's more of a daunting task for them outside of, they get a stop on the first drive, then they're in the driver's seat. They can kind of control the pace of the game. Again, it's all about setting the tone. And if Notre Dame's offense can start fast on Saturday, I think with Army being set up the way that they are and Notre Dame being as rhythm-based of an offense as they are, for me, I'll take it a step further from start fast. It's start fast and then stay fast, right? Because, I mean, Notre Dame has scored on their opening offensive possessions most games in the season. It's what happens after that first drive. In the games that Notre Dame has dominated and blown people out, they're rattling off 21-point quarters, right? In the games where they're not, it's not completely dominating. It, looks a little slow to start. I mean, Notre Dame scored on their opening possession in Northern Illinois. Yeah. It's just those are going to be the things that I'm looking at.
Yeah.
You have to start fast and stay fast.
Field goal against A&M. Touchdown against Northern Illinois, touchdown against Purdue. I don't believe they scored on their first possession against Miami.
Nope.
Scored a touchdown on the first 3 possessions against Louisville. Did not score on your first possession against Stanford. Scored on your first possession against Georgia Tech. No, did not. Did not score until the second quarter against Georgia Tech. Did score early and often against Navy. Scored a touchdown on the first possession against Florida State. And scored a first possession on their touchdown, or scored a touchdown on their first possession against Virginia.
Yep.
So let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 of their 10 games so far, they've scored in their first drive, and all but one of those was a touchdown. The A&M game being the only exception. So, but to your point, they haven't built on it in as many of those games like they did Navy, like they did Louisville. Where you're up 21-7 at the end of the first quarter. And to the counter to that too is like we talked about, like, to protect the defense if they're not having a rough game and it's taking them a while to get used to the option. The other side of it is if the defense is playing well early and they're getting you stops, you need to reward them with touchdowns of your
100%.
own to put Navy behind the sticks a little bit, because this is not a team that's geared towards coming back if you get up on them multiple scores. Because they're just the nature of who they are. So you get a couple touchdown lead in the second half, it may take them a while to get those 2 touchdowns to tie it, and you got to keep putting it on them. So that's the other part of it, Trev, is it's not only meant to protect your defense. That's one way. But if your defense is playing well, you want to make sure that you're helping to put that team away. Number 2, Trevor's, I watched this Army team. This is an incredibly disciplined defensive football team. They are just really smart. They know their keys. They know where to go. You have to try to find ways to get them to be thinking and moving. So my key number 2 is this needs to be a very active game for Notre Dame pre-snap. I'd like to see them push the tempo a little bit, but it's not so much about tempo in this game. I think tempo can help you. It's about movement. It's about motions and shifts and not just like the back motions out. That's part of it, but it's a lot of different things. It's starting with, the tight ends into the field, and then you motion them, and then you bring a guy across, or you motion the tight ends over, then you bring a jet, and you're doing these things with some pace, right? Where you're not just lining up, motioning, and then letting them readjust, but you're moving, you're stacking your receivers, you're doing different things. Getting some jet action going, some orbit action going, some things to kind of mess with the eye discipline of the Army defense, because if they can just sit back and read and react, they're pretty good. It's getting them kind of, and they're going to guess right a lot, or not right. They're going to read it correctly a lot, but you can create enough opportunities to kind of create some big plays, because big plays are going to be a big part of this game, Trevor. And one of the the most intriguing aspects of this game, and I'm going to have an article about this later. Notre Dame is the number 8 team in the country when it comes to most rushing yards of 30 yards or more. And Army is number one. They have not allowed a single run all season of 30 yards or more. And let me see how many they've had of 20. They've only allowed one run all season of 20 yards or more from an opponent. They haven't allowed any of 30 or longer. And when you look at Notre Dame on the season and you look at their offense and kind of where they are offensively, look at their run game, I should say. Notre Dame this season ranks, let me pull it up here real quick. Notre Dame right here. I said they ranked 8th in 30-yard gains. They're 17th in 20-yard gains. They are 7th in 40-yard gains or more. They're 5th in 50-yard gains this year with 5. They are 4th in gains of 40 yards or more, 60 yards or more with 4. And then, of course, they are tied for 4th in plays of more than 70 yards because they've had 2 70-yard touchdowns this season. And when Notre Dame tends to go for big plays, they usually go for touchdowns. You don't see Notre Dame guys getting caught a lot, at least Jadarian Price and Jeremiah Love. If they're going beyond 30, they're scoring because you're just not catching them. And then you contrast that with an Army defense that has given up literally one carry all season that has gone for more than 20 yards or more. One. And that play went for less than 30. It was between 20 and 29. That contrast is huge. And a big part of it is because teams just kind of line up and they do like just the typical spread motions. You know, you go from 2x2 to 3x1 or 3x1 to 2x2. That doesn't do anything to Army. It doesn't. It's the stuff that you're using fast motions. You're getting into stacks. You're then doing post-snap switches. You're moving your tight ends, shifting them over, doing all these type of things to try to create some wrong reads from a team that doesn't make a lot of wrong reads. And then hopefully that can give you that can be the difference between a hole that big and a hole that big, and a hole this big with Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price tends to be big plays and touchdowns.
Yeah.
You know, and that's the big key is, and I'm really curious to see how Mike Denbrock is able to spread Army out to try to create some opportunities for him to get his backs in space, because this Army defense is legit against who they've played. But let's like I said this the other day, some of the responses to our show on Tuesday. Oh, Notre Dame should, guys, the show on Tuesday wasn't about Notre Dame. It was about Army, right? This one's about Notre Dame. And I can watch this Army defense and appreciate it and say, gosh, that's coached really well. And still say, like, here's Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price and Riley Leonard, and here's everyone else that they've faced this season way down here. They have not faced an offense that has one back like this, much less 3, 4 backs like this, and a quarterback who's, I would argue, second or third most dynamic quarterback in all of college football this year. Obviously, you have to have Jalen Milroe up in that conversation at the top. But, you know, you go past that and you're saying the only other quarterbacks that you look at and say are really more dynamic than Riley Leonard are the kid that's on the other sideline of this game. But he's a little different. I wouldn't call him necessarily dynamic as much as I'd say he's just really good and he's a hammer and he's, you know, but I mean, Riley Leonard's in that conversation as being one of the more dynamic, especially the Power 5 level. I mean, I watched that kid from New Mexico the other night for the first time. That kid's really fun to watch, that Dampier kid. And, you know, but as far as like at the Power 5 level, it's like it's Jalen Milroe, it's Riley Leonard, and then that's the list. You know what I mean? Like those are the dudes at the Power 5 at the top, in my opinion, the Power 5 level. So this is a dynamic they haven't seen yet. I'm real curious to see what Mike Denbrock's game plan is to get those guys in space. But one thing that can help out a ton, Trev, is a lot of movement pre and post snap that causes, I mean, yeah, you can line up and just say, we're going to go right at them. And that's fine. There needs to be some of that. But at the same time, there's things you can do to get them out of their element that are going to create more of those big play opportunities for your backs. Because Trev, you know what football is. When you've been great at something all year, and I'm talking like 8, 9 games into the season, and somebody does something to you that you're like, that hasn't happened to us before. That can mess with you a little bit.
Yeah.
And if Notre Dame can come out and rip off a couple big plays and a couple big runs early in that game, it's going to say to Army, like, hey, fellas, we respect y'all and we appreciate what y'all have done to the AAC this year, but you're playing with the big boys now as far from a football standpoint. You know what I mean? And that's why I think this part of this key to victory is so important, Trev.
Yeah, similar to what Army's offense is going to try to do to Notre Dame's defense, Notre Dame's offense has to test the eye discipline of Army's. Very much so. And then when you compound that with Notre Dame's athletic ability being something that Army just has not seen this year. They played some quality opponent. Like North Texas was a good offense. They were averaging 40.6 points per game. North Texas doesn't have the athletes that Notre Dame has on offense. You know, like they have not faced a team this year that has a Riley Leonard at quarterback, a Jeremiah Love in the backfield.
Yeah, good athletes for that level. It's a different animal.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just it's funny. A buddy and I talk about this all the time about how there's levels to everything. You know, like and sometimes you kind of have to look at everything subjectively and about like people's level of competition relative to what they're playing and relative to what Army is playing right now to their level of competition. They are really good. They're a really good football team. They are, which is why we talked about it ad nauseum on Tuesday. Once you get up there and you're playing the Notre Dames of the world, you know what I mean? It's just a different game. It is, which is no knock on Army. If anybody watched the Tuesday show, they know how high Bryan and I are on this team, right? They're a good football team. And they are a good football team that Notre Dame should beat by multiple scores if they start fast, if they're very active pre-snap, because that's going to be the best way to get your athletes into space. Use intentional motion. Don't just not this little zipper motion with Mitchell Evans and be like, now we've motioned him to the right, so we're going to run to the right. Like
we all know it's coming. Yeah, exactly.
Right. Like use very intentional motion. Post-snap switches is going to be huge. Make Army's defense have to make decisions on the fly and not just trust their coaching, which is very good.
Mm-hmm.
But put them in a spot where, okay, we haven't really seen that this much this year, and we don't have the athleticism to kind of make up for the fact that we haven't seen that this year. Mm-hmm. You know, that's what I think Notre Dame is going to have to. We talk big picture about Notre Dame's win and what this statement means. It's just continuing to broaden that gap of how athletic of a football team this actually is. Because to your point, Bryan, a couple of shows ago, you were talking about like nobody's talking about how fast Notre Dame is. Mm-hmm. Nobody's talking on offense and defense. They have an opportunity to go out again this week and do that. And being active pre-snap is going to be huge into that.
Well, the one thing we did talk about on Tuesday was Navy and Army are not as different schematically as people are trying to make them out to be. They're not. Navy does some funky things pre-snap and some, but they're still in the same family of offense, right? And some of the responsive, they're so much different than Navy. No, they look different than Navy, but there's a difference between looking different and what your scheme is. And the scheme it's different, but it's not dramatically different.
No.
One difference that I've noticed from Army and Navy, and this is true defensively, is this is a much more physical group than what Navy has. It's bigger, it's more physical, but they're not as athletic, in my opinion, as the Navy guys. That's a difference to me. And that's something where Mike Denbrock needs to, I know he recognizes that, but like he needs to find ways to get Jaden Harrison, Jaden Greathouse, Chris Mitchell, Bo Collins, KK Smith, Mitchell Evans, and then, of course, the running backs in situations where they can make big plays, not just in the run game, but also the pass game. So that's obviously another big key to this thing for them. The other one, Trev, is they've got to establish a ground game. And I'll talk about the pass game next, but this is a situation where it's not just good on good, it's great on great. And when you stack the matchup, Trev, Notre Dame is the number 11 rushing team in the country, 216.7 yards per game. They rank 4th in the country in yards per attempt at 6.0. They rank 6th in the country in rushing touchdowns at 32. They rank 8th in the country, as I mentioned, in runs of 30 yards or more. And they rank 31st in the country in fewest tackles for loss allowed. And then you look at it. What's interesting is Notre Dame's not that far behind Army in yards per attempt and touchdowns on the season, and they have more big plays than Army does. or no, excuse me, one fewer big play than Army does. That's actually something that's pretty interesting about Army is they rip off a lot of big plays in the run game too. But the Army defense is third in the country in rushing yards per game, 15th in yards per attempt. They've only allowed 3 rushing touchdowns all season, and they have not allowed a single rush of 30 yards or more all season. And they're 88th in tackles for loss per game. So, like, this is 2 elite groups statistically, and as far as what they mean to their team going at each other. And there's this thought that, well, Notre Dame's not going to be able to run the ball like this when they play SEC teams. Well, I mean, we've seen them play an SEC team, but the reality is Notre Dame has not really played a defense that has been able to really challenge them in a while when it comes to like being really good at running the football. And even recently, when you look at it, Trev, it's like when you look at Notre Dame's kind of rushing numbers here in the last few games, they had 168 against Stoops. Excuse me. I was pulling up Army's. Those numbers aren't right. I know that's not right. But Notre Dame went for $168 against Georgia Tech, who actually has a pretty good rushing defense. And Notre Dame had a couple negatives that kind of drew them back, but 168 is the second best performance they've had all year. In the 2 games since playing Notre Dame, Georgia Tech held Virginia Tech to 99 yards, and they held Miami to 88 yards rushing. Notre Dame went for 168. The only team to go for more was Amorian Hampton in North Carolina, went for 201. And so, obviously, and Notre Dame's 4.3 yards per carry is third best against them all season, and 3 rushing touchdowns. Georgia Tech's only given up 8 rushing touchdowns all season. Notre Dame has 3 of them. So outside of Georgia Tech, they haven't played a lot of great rushing defenses, and they've gone for over 200 yards in 4 of their last 5 games. Right? They went for over 200 yards. They went for 229 against Stanford. They went for 265 against Navy. They went for 201 against Florida State. 201 against Florida State, only on 32 carries. And they went for 234 against Virginia. Now, not a lot of those teams, Trevor, were great in rushing defense.
Sure.
But none of them were really bad outside of Florida State. Like Virginia was not bad in rushing defense. Stanford was not bad in rushing defense. Their numbers now are a little bit inflated because of the Notre Dame game. You know what I mean? I mean, you look at Virginia, they gave up 194 to Clemson, 234 to Notre Dame, but Notre Dame was over a full yard more yards per carry against Virginia than Clemson was. The next highest amount of yards they had was 177 to Louisville. And then the next is 147 to Richmond. They've held 2 of their opponents under 100, including Boston College. Held Pitt to 127. North Carolina's really good rushing offense to 135. So like that's a quality run defense, not a great run defense, but a quality one. And Notre Dame just ran all over them. You know what I mean? And efficient and then big plays. And so it's like if you're going to be a team that contend for a championship, you've got to be able to find ways to run the ball on Army. You just do, and not get sucked into the whole. Like I think a lot of other teams have kind of gotten sucked into the whole, well, you can't run on them, so you're just going to have to figure out ways to beat them through the air. That's fine. Notre Dame does need to have some success through the air, but that's what Army wants you to do. They don't want you to run the football because they do a lot of different stuff coverage-wise to create mistakes and, get your quarterback. They bait their quarterbacks really well. That's why they have so many interceptions is they really show too high and then just kind of rob that one safety under the middle. So you're thinking you're throwing a backside seam and that guy's coming down and jumping underneath it and, I think I got this overcut because of this. And then all of a sudden that safety's jumping that route. And, but you've got to be able to figure out how to run football. And I'm not saying you come out with a game plan where it's like stubbornly banging your head against the wall and just, running into a brick wall. But you've got to create from a creativity standpoint and an effectiveness standpoint, you've got to be able to come out and run the football. You have to be able to do that. And if you can run the ball on this Army team, then that just says, okay, what we've seen in recent weeks is not an anomaly. This is just who Notre Dame is. I also think if you can run on Army, it creates some other big opportunities, which I'll talk about next. But I really do believe that this is one of those games, Trevor, where the Notre Dame offense needs to take a little bit of pride in saying, you think you're really good at stopping the run, huh? You haven't seen anything like what we got for you. And that, again, doesn't mean you come out 12 personnel and just run inside zone every play. But it means you got to figure out ways to really gash them in the run game. And if you can create some big plays while doing it, that's gonna do some punishing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, agree with everything that you just said. The only other thing that I'm going to add is another thing that establishing the run is going to do for you as well. It's going to give your defense more of a little bit more rest on the sideline. This is going to be a very physical football game,
Mm-hmm.
and you're going up against a team that can literally eat the football. So as much time as Notre Dame's defense can have on the sideline, getting rest. Now, am I going to be upset if in the first quarter Notre Dame rattles off, 17 points because they're just throwing bombs down the field? No, I'm not going to be upset about that at all. But again, it just kind of goes into, we need to see Notre Dame have a balanced offense. We still have to see Notre Dame establish a ground game against a really good rushing defense, to your point. And it's going to make sure that the defense is staying fresh for the majority of the game. So that would be my only other add.
Here's another big reason why I think it's important. When teams, when they have felt that teams were in running situations, or like they were maybe having a little bit of success at running the ball on them at a certain point in time, early in games especially, Army will do a lot more with their coverages to get their safeties down in the box. What has helped their rush defense a lot this year, and I think it was Marcus Freeman or Mike Denbrock talked about it this week. I can't remember who, but part of the success of their rush defense is the fact that they get on teams so big early, and you're going into your third possession of the game, and you're down 21-0 because Army started with the ball, and it's your first possession of the third quarter, and it's your third possession of the game. You're down 3 touchdowns. You don't have time to go on a 9-play drive that takes 5 minutes off the clock and you run the football. That's helped them a little bit. But if you look at a couple of the games where, they early on, they had to respect the opponent's rushing attack, they will do some things to kind of get guys down in the box and stop the run. And I think they will certainly know that they need to do that against Notre Dame, because they do play in a relatively pass-oriented league. If we're being honest, the American Athletic Conference is not necessarily an offense known for like high-powered rushing attacks outside of, you've got Army, Navy, and Tulane, and nobody else is really great at rushing the ball. There's only 3 teams in the entire league that average over 5 yards a carry, and that's Tulane, Navy, and Army. And that's because you have those rushing attacks. There's one team that's not an option team that averages over 200 yards rushing. There's 2 teams that average over 300 yards passing per game. So it's a bit of a finesse league. It's just a different animal than really what Notre Dame does. So I think you're going to see Army do a little bit more of getting their safeties down in the box, especially if Notre Dame can establish the running game early. And what that's going to do, Trevor, is open up some big play opportunities in the play action game. So my fourth key, and I kind of said this jokingly, is make play action great again, right? That's really what this game is about, is if you can establish the run and they know we can't just play our base defense and stop their run, we've got to get our safeties involved. That's going to open up some downfield big play opportunities in the throwing game. And East Carolina missed a couple huge big play opportunities. Like one early in the game, they ran a post route from the slot, and the safety was from the outside, and the safety was the corner was just turned around because that field safety came down, and the other safety was working off the hash. There was nobody protected, and the quarterback just missed it. And then you had another play later in the game where it was from the slot where they were able to kind of get in a single high look where the boundary safety rolled and the field safety was locked in coverage in the slot, and he just stuck him on a corner post. Guy bit on it, and he had his hips flipped, and the quarterback just couldn't put it on him. There's some opportunities to hit some big downfield shots if you can establish your throwing game or running game. If you just come out and you're just nonstop throwing, okay, maybe you're not as susceptible. They're not as susceptible to some of those big play opportunities. There are things in the drop back game you can do. I think they play a lot of off coverage outside. I think what they do is they'll play off coverage and then just rally to the football really fast, trying to dare you to throw hitches and slides so they can rally to the ball and drill you. As long as the receivers run proper routes, I do think there's some things they can do comeback wise. Some flood concepts have given them some problems. There's some things you can do throwing the football. But running the football and getting their safeties down in the box has opened up some opportunities. The thing is, you just don't see it often because they get on teams so big, Trevor, that now they can play quarters and play off and drop 8. I mean, there was a play we were watching the North Texas game where it was like 14-3, and Army lines up, and there's 3 guys on the defensive line. This is like the third quarter, and the linebackers are like 5-6 yards off the ball and just dropping at the snap because they knew North Texas was going to try to run football. And that plays into why they're successful in the pass game.
Right.
If you can run the football, and if they try to do that against Notre Dame early in the game, it's like, all right, Notre Dame's going to run for 350 yards. I mean, they're just going to run, you know what I mean? They're not going to do that. That's why establishing the run game, getting early, don't let them jump out to a big lead where now you have to throw the ball because then you're playing right into their hands. All these things build, and if you can have early success, if you can run the football effectively, I do think there's some big play opportunities for you to have in the pass game. Off play. I mean, there's some drop back stuff too, but especially play action where you can just say, hey, look, man, if we can have a couple runs early where we're gashing them. I mean, it doesn't have to be like a bunch of 30-yard runs, but 8 yards, 5 yards, 10 yards, 13 yards, 6 yards, 5 yards, 7 yards, just boom, 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 boom. Now all of a sudden they're start playing a different kind of quarters, that double robber type of quarters. And all of a sudden you're play action out of 12 personnel, Chris Mitchell or KK Smith or Jaden Harrison or Jaden Greathouse is running a, some sort of stick post concept, and you're throwing that sucker over top and he's chasing. You know what I mean? That's something that I want to see in this game. If they can get that going, I think this offense can roll.
Yeah, I love play action being the final key to victory for this offense. I do. Army safeties fly downhill. Their linebackers fly downhill. Like, that's why they're such a physical defense. They're very aggressive. They play very well in the box. They tackle well. They do. And that's why some teams, on top of them just being down big in games and limited possessions, that is another reason why they have struggled why opponents have struggled to run the ball against Army. So I think play action is going to be great. I mean, one thing that I noticed is Notre Dame ran a lot of pistol on Saturday against Virginia and didn't use a whole lot of play action out of it. Again, I know I talked on Tuesday about how I don't think Mike Denbrock has like a secret playbook for the postseason and one that he's using right now, right? But I do think that there is a reason why they are running that much out of pistol. And then the following week, they have a team that plays very aggressively downhill. They're getting Riley Leonard to turn us back to the line of scrimmage, hand the ball off. Just feels like something's getting set up. That's all I'm saying. I'll leave that up for interpretation, and you guys can take that as you will. But it feels like there's going to be a couple of play action shots that are going to be taken on Saturday.